Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
You're watching Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Several days ago, China's Center for Disease Control and Prevention said that the efficacy of Chinese COVID vaccines is low and that the country was considering mixing vaccines as a way of boosting efficacy. Now, this was a rare admission of weakness, the first time a government body has acknowledged concerns over the effectiveness of homegrown jabs. China has so far supplied more than 40 million doses to over 30 countries across the globe, including the 200,000 doses it sent to Malaysia. Will this revelation by China's CDC change our national immunization plan? Joining us on the show tonight to discuss this further, we have Dr. Ghows Azzam. He's an associate professor at the School of Biological Sciences at University of Science Malaysia. He is also currently seconded as the special advisor to the Minister of Science, Technology and Innovation, Khairy Jamaluddin, who has been picked by Cabinet to lead the national COVID-19 vaccination drive as coordinating minister. Dr. Ghows, welcome to the show. It's good to have you here.
Thank you, Melisa.
So let's begin with that news about the Chinese CDC's comments. How is the Malaysian government thinking about those comments made, and how does that affect our immunization plan? Does it change our strategy?
Right. So the Chinese director, the CDC director, Dr. Gao Fu, mentioned that in a scientific conference, and he was talking about a lot of things, and that was the part that was picked up by the media. He later mentioned that it was a misunderstanding, right? So he was talking vaccines in general, so it depends on which sort of media you were looking at. So, but generally he was saying that it was a misunderstanding. He was not focusing on just the Chinese vaccine, but he was saying like vaccines, the COVID vaccines in general. Because if you see that what he was suggesting, right, he was saying, like you quote, mixing vaccines. But this is not something new. If you look at the Western vaccines, AstraZeneca a few months ago mentioned that they are going to collaborate with Gamaleya for the Sputnik to mix the vaccine, AstraZeneca vaccine and Sputnik. And if you look, there's a study in the UK as well, led by Oxford University. It's called the COMCAV, where they are now mixing AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Novavax, and
it's like a cocktail.
It's like a cocktail.
So mixing
That's
vaccine
correct.
means it will increase the efficacy.
This is what they are looking at because, like you said, in the UK, right? First of all, they are extending the duration to about 12 weeks. So in this study, what they're looking at is they're looking at what will happen if you mix those vaccines, whether you get increased efficacy, do you have the same antibody response, and these are sort of things that you're looking at, because let's say there's a shortage of vaccine, then you can mix and match vaccine with data available. So the study has been started in the UK. Plus, in sort of increasing efficacy, we all know like Moderna, Pfizer, these are vaccines with the reported 90-95% efficacy. But these two companies are also doing studies to increase this efficacy. Moderna has started their third booster study to increase the efficacy, so maybe from 95% to 99%. And this is what we saw in the polio vaccine. Polio vaccine, when it first started, it was about 60 to 80%. But after a while, they tweaked the polio vaccine, and now they have this 3-dose regimen of polio vaccine with an efficacy rate of 99%. So it's not something new, what Dr. Gao Fu was saying, right? It's something that it's common in vaccine. They're always trying to increase the efficacy. If you look at the Chinese vaccine, for example, and in Malaysia, we have the Sinovac vaccine in our portfolio. It's not that bad, because if you look at the Turkey study, which is a general population, there's about 10,000 volunteers. The efficacy rate was 83.5%, which is not that far off of Pfizer and Moderna, 90%, but it's still very high, 83%. And I think this is the misconception that a lot of people have. A lot of people are looking at just the Brazilian data. And this is where, you know, you get the 50% efficacy.
Right.
Yeah, can I ask you about the issue of efficacy? Because in some of the reports that go with some depth into the issue, it applies to different types of effects that the vaccine has. One is efficacy in terms of catching the disease. The other is about developing the disease, and the other is developing different intensities of disease, from mild to severe cases. So apparently, with the Chinese vaccine, the Sinovac vaccine candidate, it actually is very good in terms of preventing severe reactions to the infection, but not so much with the mild infection. Could you help clarify?
50% that you mentioned was for mild cases.
For mild, you're right. So Sharaad, so in the Brazil study, they announced 3 efficacy. So the efficacy against symptomatic, that's the very mild COVID, is 50.4%. But they also mentioned about cases that require assistance. So that is a bit more severe, and that has an efficacy of 83%. And then the most important bit, which is the efficacy against moderate to severe COVID. That efficacy is 100%, meaning if you get the Sinovac vaccine, you probably would not be hospitalized. Even if you catch the vaccine, maybe you get a bit of symptom, but you know, the biggest problem with COVID-19 is, you know, your body can actually undergo what you call it, like the mucus will be starting to build up in your lungs, and then you find it hard to breathe, and then you have to be hospitalized, you have to be ventilated, and that is what the vaccine is protecting you against. And this is the most important thing, is that the Sinovac vaccine has 100% efficacy to protect you from the severe COVID. And that is important, because now we are, going back to your question about the government's rollout plan, we are now starting phase 2 next week. And recently, they have announced that we are going to use Sinovac for the above 60.
That's right. That statement, I think, has created a little bit of concern, right? Because you had the headlines coming out of the CDC comment about Chinese vaccine efficacy, and then you've kind of making it into, like, you're thinking about, oh, how will that affect me? How will that affect my parents, the elderly, my family getting the vaccine? So Khairy Jamaluddin has said that the government will go ahead using Sinovac for the vaccine. How will you address the concerns or the hesitancy that may come out from the headlines of China?
Okay, so I mean, from the China headline, I think this is something that people should understand. What he said was actually quite a common thing. It's just that maybe it was misinterpreted. Okay, so the fact that we should be mixing, I mean, he suggests to be mixing vaccine is something that's already been done for the Western vaccine. Increasing efficacy is always good. It's good for everyone. If you can find, you know, something that can increase the efficacy of vaccines, that's good for everyone. But the most important thing, like I said, I mean, the announcement to say that we're going to use it for over 60, people should understand that Sinovac vaccine has been proven to show that it can protect you from getting the severe COVID. That's the most important thing.
If my mother is going to get the Sinovac vaccine, should I be worried?
No, you should not be worried, because Sinovac vaccine, I can give you some data why the government announced the usage of Sinovac vaccine over 60 is because we looked at the data from Turkey, from Brazil, and from Chile. From Turkey, the Turkey data shows that they have given it to they have given more than 11 million doses to over 60. They've also Brazil has given more than 7.4 million doses to above 60, and Chile more than 3 million doses of Sinovac vaccine. In total, the data that we have is more than 20 million doses have been given to over 60. And it shows that it is safe. There is no adverse side effect, and they are continuing to roll it out. And even Indonesia is using it, but we don't have the data from Indonesia.
Can I ask you though, I mean, it seems that with different vaccine candidates, the clinical trials don't always cover all the demographics. And sometimes they wait later to do people over 60 or younger people. And there are studies for juveniles as well, conducted for some of the vaccines. Could you help us understand, I mean, should Malaysians now do a crash course on vaccines and clinical trials
And efficacy.
and efficacy in order not to panic every time they read a headline that suggests this is bad or this is good?
Correct. So what I would advise is that we should trust our regulatory body. Our regulatory body, the NPRA, is one of the toughest regulatory body in the world. They've scrutinized every single data that they have to make sure that whatever they approve is safe and efficacious to be used in Malaysia. Because like you said, I mean, there's a lot of confusion about efficacy. So even the word efficacy, when you say about Pfizer 91%, but the 91%, how do you get that 91%? So a lot of people do not understand how you get the 91%. It's the comparison between in the clinical trial, you have people who got the vaccine and people who do not get the vaccine. And then they will look at the differences between these two groups to get into the vaccine efficacy. So even the calculation for efficacy is a bit more complex than, and basically trying to compare a clinical trial, one clinical trial and another clinical trial is not the same. For example, the Brazil clinical trial was done solely on medical frontliners. So these are all health frontliners that are facing COVID-19 every single day in a country ravaged with COVID cases. So you can understand where efficacy will be lower compared to Turkey's data at 83% when they did it in the general population. That's why I would trust the Turkey data a bit more, because that is a bit more similar to a normal situation, and that is also a bit more comparable to other clinical trials.
I mean, that would be contingent on people reading beyond headlines,
There
right?
you
Sometimes
go.
the headlines, you're just skimming through news, and headlines can evoke reactions that may be tempered by reading the whole article. I wanted to ask you about another headline that seems to be getting a lot of traction, has been the blood clots, the concerns over blood clots. The European Medicines Agency last week said that they found rare cases of blood clots among recipients of the AstraZeneca vaccine. How is Malaysia looking at that? Are we concerned about that? How should we be processing this information?
Okay, so I think this has been asked many times already to YB Minister, and he has said that currently the team behind JKJAV, the expert team, is looking at all the data. Because after EMA announced that, they also released the data, AstraZeneca also released the data, so they are looking at it, and they will brief JKJAV next week. So I think this is what our YB Minister has said.
Again, coming back to waiting for what the regulators rule on this.
That's correct. So let the expert look at the data, scrutinize the data, and then come to a conclusion and advise the ministers, advise the committee on what we're going to do next. And that is what we have been doing all this time anyway. So we let the experts do it.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break and come back and continue this conversation with Dr. Ghows Azzam. Stay tuned to consider this. Welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. With me is Sharaad, Kuttan, and we're chatting tonight to Dr. Ghows Azzam. He's the Special Advisor to the Minister of Science, Technology and Innovation, the Coordinating Minister for the National Immunization Program, Khairy Jamaluddin. Dr. Ghows, if I can ask you a little bit about the variants. Now, one of the things that that we're seeing more and more is the presence of variants within local cases. How has the emergence of variants within Malaysia affected our immunization strategy? I mean, have we taken this into consideration?
Yes. So recently, DG Tan Sri Nur Hisham announced that Malaysia has detected 5 of the UK variant, which is the B117, and 17 cases of the South African variant, which is the B1351 variant. So for us, it's quite an alarming thing to see that these variants have arrived in Malaysia, right? So what is happening right now is that we are closely looking at the data that's been coming out from places where they already have the South African variant or the UK variant to see their data on the efficacy of the vaccine. So far, it looks like, for example, the Pfizer vaccine, which has a lot of data coming out, it shows that it has still protection against the UK variant, and also it protects from the South African variant, although the efficacy might be a bit lower, but the protection is still there. However, there are some vaccines, like for example AstraZeneca, that has been shown from the South African study that it doesn't have any much protection against the South African variant. So that is quite alarming, because we've detected 17 cases in Malaysia. Hopefully those cases are isolated and it doesn't spread, because if the variant starts spreading, then we have to relook again at our vaccine and to see which one we can still continue on using and which one we have to stop using if it doesn't offer you protection, right?
Yeah, so one of the things, I think this is a long-standing discussion about the mutation of the virus itself, and that many of the vaccines just need to be tweaked, as it were, to deal with the evolving nature of the coronavirus. But then the fear, of course, is that there will be some variants that break through the vaccine shield, as it were. Could you help us understand? This is a dynamic situation, right? So what is it that public health officials think about when they have a situation as dynamic as the coronavirus? What is it that it will need to be planned for in the future, as it were?
Okay, so the variants, so there's a couple of things. So first of all, for example, like the Pfizer contract that we've gone through, so if they develop a new vaccine to cover the variant, we are entitled to get the new version of the vaccine. Is part of the contract. So any improvement that they've made, we will get that as part of our orders. And I know that Moderna is doing this variant study, Pfizer is doing the variant study, AstraZeneca is doing the variant study, even Sinovac and all the Chinese vaccines, because they worry that for example, the South African variant might spread all over the world, and then suddenly your vaccine stops working. You need to have a backup plan. So I think a lot of these pharmaceutical companies have already looked into this, and we are waiting for the data. So some data have come out. For example, like the Pfizer vaccine shows that it can still protect you. But what Malaysia can do, so this is quite important. So this is where recently YB Khairy also mentioned that we are now ramping up our genomic surveillance. And what that means is that we are looking at the whole virus sequence to see what variant we have in Malaysia running around. So if you look at what, for example, when Tan Sri DG announced this, he always mentioned that from genomic sequencing. So it's not just an RT-PCR, because RT-PCR will tell you whether you're positive or not. It's hardly will tell you what variant you get infected with. So you still have to get the swab and do a genomic sequencing to know what variant you have. And this is also, genomic surveillance is also a way for you to detect new variants. For example, let's say there is, because the virus keeps on mutating, right? So sometimes it will pop up a new variant. So just in case there's a new variant in Malaysia, with the genomic surveillance, we can sort of identify it and sort of contain it very quickly. So genomic surveillance is very important, and we've already ramping up our genomic surveillance capability. We have the capability in Malaysia, it's just the funding was not there, but now we have the funding for genomic surveillance, and this will be good for us to protect our vaccine portfolio.
Okay, that's quite interesting. One thing that you said to us a little bit earlier is just, it struck me just how quickly news about vaccines and vaccine development and the public health measures around it change. But one of the things we do know for certain is that vaccination is not a silver bullet. It's just one of the toolkit of measures that the government is saying for us to manage this pandemic. How should we be thinking about once the vaccination is done, the period after that takes a while for it to develop some kind of efficacy, right? How should we be thinking about that? And I'm thinking about the case of the Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan, who got COVID-19 2 days after getting vaccinated. What is the government saying to people about this?
Okay, so I mean the case for Imran Khan is because he got the COVID 2 days after vaccination, his first dose. So that was not enough time for his body to build up the antibody. Generally, it would take about 1 to 2 weeks after your second dose for you to have sort of full immunity against COVID. I mean, not full, I mean maximum protection. depending on the person. So 1 to 2 weeks after the second dose. So you still need quite a lot of time. So even if you get the first dose, it doesn't mean you're protected, right? You build up your antibody, and when you get the second dose, it will build up some more, right? So if you get your first shot of the vaccine, don't go, taking off your mask or anything and move
Don't
around.
go party.
Don't go on a party, for example. But going back to the whole country, right? So what we are looking at is that hopefully when vaccination starts to ramp up and more of Malaysians are vaccinated, we hope to see that the cases will come down. And what's more importantly, we hope to see hospitalization cases to come down. So some people might get the vaccine, might still be able to get COVID, but they just have slight fever, for example. And this has been shown in Singapore recently. They say that someone who has gotten 2 doses of the mRNA vaccine showed some symptomatic COVID. But then the dorm that he was staying in, they tested everyone, no one else got the COVID. So that sort of shows you the 90-95% efficacy that maybe one person can still have COVID and can transmit the virus. But if everyone else is vaccinated, then the rest might be protected, so it will not spread. It will stop spreading.
And I believe that pool was about 1,500.
Yes, about 1,000. So Singapore tested all 1,500 of them, and no one else was positive. So that's a good thing.
Right. So this is all about that herd immunity issue that's been long talked about. I mean, how far off are we? You're a scientist. What realistically are we looking at a situation where herd immunity could be built and we can maybe even open up our borders and such?
So the herd immunity, there's a calculation to the herd immunity. So that is why we project around 70 to 80% of Malaysian that needs to be vaccinated if we want to reach herd immunity. But this can change depending on the type of vaccine and emergence of new variant. But roughly about 70 to 80%. So this is why if you look, usually we'll mention we want to vaccinate 80% of the population by end of the year. So if we can do that, hopefully by end of the year we have enough people protected that we're not going to have a lot of cases of COVID cases. This has been slowly showing in some countries who have been far advanced in vaccinating their population. And they've shown that the cases are going down massively. The number of hospitalization have gone down massively. But we also recently saw, like in Turkey, for example, because they use mostly Sinovac. People have been, again, discussing about Sinovac, right? They've shown that their cases of hospitalization for above 60 has come down, almost half. And their cases of positive cases have also come down, I think, about half. Right? So even with the Sinovac vaccine, Turkey has started to see the cases has come down, the cases of hospitalization has come down because they've vaccinated quite a lot of their population. And of course, the other countries that uses Pfizer have also shown almost the same result. Cases have come down. So we'll see in this next few months, they will be very interesting to see when some countries have reached 70 or 80% of their population. What happened then? Do their cases flatten out at the bottom, or does it increase again? I think that is something that's JKJAV is constantly looking at this data from these countries that are actually advanced, and what sort of vaccines they use, and what sort of strategies they use, and how they deal with variants.
Well, one of the things, so you said that we want to, our target is to achieve 70 to 80% by the end of the year. And I was reading comments made by Khairy Jamaluddin that, if we're not seeing more sign-ups, there's going to be a critical point where Malaysia has to decide whether we need that extra push, whether we need to make it mandatory. And I think it was September that he said that's the inflection point. How are you thinking about this? I know the last time we spoke, you also said that mandatory, forcing anyone to take a vaccine is not a good idea. But how should Malaysians be thinking about this? If we don't sign up, then we're not going to achieve this target.
Yeah. So what YB Khairy was also saying, because by September, we should have enough vaccine arriving in Malaysia to cover 80% of the population. So by then, our supply would have exceeded demand. And we need to look at, in September, first of all, how many people have registered, how many people have taken the vaccine, and of course, what are the cases numbers like, right? Have cases gone down, or is it still ramping up? So I think a lot of considerations to be made in September. If our take-up rate is low and our cases are high, then maybe some tough choices have to be decided. But if the take-up rate is good, registration goes up. Once more and more people getting vaccinated, then hopefully there's this like fear, peer pressure or fear of missing out, for example. I mean, we've already started to see this. Like before the vaccine comes, people were worried, like, can we handle the Pfizer vaccine? Is it safe? And now once a lot of frontliners have been getting their vaccines and they've been showing it in social media. Now there's a group of people saying that when are we going to get our vaccine?
Vaccine envy.
Vaccine envy, right?
We have it. So we have vaccine envy.
That's correct. Some people have vaccine envy and they keep saying, we've registered in February, when is our turn? So some people are now suddenly very eager to get the Pfizer vaccine, and people forget already about, how can we handle Pfizer? Is it good? Is it dangerous?
Are you concerned about adverse events being given a lot of play and reversing that attitude?
There needs to be a balance. I mean, if there is an adverse event, like for example what happened with Pfizer, they have the anaphylaxis, and AstraZeneca, the blood clots. I mean, that needs to be managed properly. Like for the example, the Pfizer vaccine, the anaphylaxis, how they manage that is that they ask you to stay about 15 to 30 minutes after you get the injection, because that is when to monitor the reaction occurs. But for AstraZeneca, I think they're looking at it again, because they were saying, I think the period was about 2 weeks. That's quite a long time. So I think they need to understand why it happened and how to mitigate it. I think that's crucial. So adverse event, it will happen, and we have to communicate, what sort of things you should expect and what are we doing to mitigate it. So Pfizer is not a big problem. The mitigation is just you wait for half an hour. If you're fine, you go away. If you have some sort of reaction, a medical personnel is there to observe you, and they know what to do if you start having an allergic reaction.
Right. Okay.
So that's why people have started to alleviate the fear of Pfizer. For example, everyone now wants the Pfizer. Sinovac have not shown any severe effect. I mean, there's about, I think, 60 million doses has been administered all over the world. Right? If, for example, the AstraZeneca and even Johnson & Johnson, right now they're pausing Johnson & Johnson about the blood clot. That's about 1 in a million. Okay, that's very low, but it's still 1 in a million. So if 60 million doses have been given and nothing has been shown up yet, it's pretty safe, the Sinovac vaccine. So I'm confident, like you said, if anyone is offered the Sinovac vaccine or the Pfizer vaccine, please take it. There is you don't have to worry.
Thank you so much for being on the show. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
That's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. But before we leave you tonight, just a reminder that you can get all the latest news and information on COVID-19 vaccines on astroawani.com, as well as the Astro Awani app. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan, signing off the evening.
We will catch you same time on Monday. Have a great weekend, folks. Good night.